Hours by Khawaja Ahmad Abbas. It was a cold December night. The clock in the station master's office showed 7:15. Another 15 minutes for the train, thought Bina, and resumed pacing up and down the platform. It was a small station with neither a bookstall nor a restaurant. It was not possible to get even a cup of tea. The station building was a two-room affair. One displayed a board, Station Master. The other was the booking office. There was no one at the booking window. Two peasants, huddled up in their coarse blankets and with the ends of their turbans wrapped around their ears to keep out the chilly breeze, sat like formless ghosts in the corner of the veranda. Far in the distance, the red light of the signal shone out of the darkness. Bina was wearing a woolen sweater. Over it was a shawl. But at that moment, she did not need them, for she was not feeling cold. Since she had joined the Revolutionary Party, it was the first occasion on which an important piece of work had been entrusted to her. The thought of this quickened her heartbeat, and her cheeks felt feverish despite the icy breeze. Would she be able to do what she had been told? Or would she get nervous? Would she fail the party? She was prepared to face any danger for the cause. She did not care even if it involved a risk to her life. And then the present assignment was simple enough. The instructions that the secretary had given her were echoing in her ears. Look here, our old comrade, Vijay Singh, is returning home after 16 years in prison. We have learned that as soon as he reaches the city, he will be arrested again because the police fear that his return will further enhance the prestige and strength of the Revolutionary Party. So we've asked him to get off the train at Ramnagar. You must meet him at the station. He will spend the night at your house. In the morning, he can go to the city and let the police arrest him. But we want him to be free for at least 12 hours. The secretary had seemed to emphasize that 12 hours. A man deserves that after 16 years of living hell. Then he had given her a sealed letter. Give it to him and deliver his reply at the party office the very next day. He will spend the night at your house. Bina's house consisted of just two small rooms. A school teacher earning rupees 60 a month could afford nothing better. Besides, she lived alone. No family, no relations, not even a servant. She cooked her own food. Under these circumstances, would it be quite right for a stranger to spend the night under the same roof? Bina had been born and brought up in a conventional, respectable household. A college education had no doubt freed her mind to a great extent, but the fear of society, of public opinion, still lurked in her subconscious. What would people say? This fear gnawed at her heart. But she also felt that indescribable attraction. But she also felt the indescribable attraction of male company. The secret, unspoken, and suppressed desire for the experience she had so far denied herself. Desire and fear. Fear and desire. She was young, and physically awakened, but completely inexperienced in the ways of love. With the help of her book knowledge, she could participate in an academic discussion on the principles of sex, but was ignorant of its practical implications. And yet, nature had created a certain tension in her body, a sensation that was at once ticklish and soothing, delicious stabs of pain, a strange fever. She knew there was only one cure for this malady, but to take a dose of that medicine before marriage, that was out of the question. Far in the dark distance, the red light suddenly turned green. The railway lines, dull, glistening in the half-light of the solitary ramp on the platform, were beginning to echo the distant thunder of the incoming train. Bina's attention was diverted from the eternal problems of sex to the strange personality of the man who was arriving by that train and who would be her guest for the next 12 hours. Vijay Singh. It was a name to reckon with in the annals of revolution. His revolutionary achievements were still remembered. Today, he was coming back after spending 16 years in prison. Tomorrow, he might be locked up again. Such was his life. He was afraid neither of jails nor of gallows. She had seen his picture in the party office, a handsome, strong, broad-shouldered young man with a noble forehead and bright black eyes, which, even in a picture, seemed to hypnotize. Beautiful eyes, terrible eyes. There was a passion, madness in their depths, but on the surface was childish simplicity. It was impossible to look at those eyes and not be fascinated. Bina had learned from these eyes her first revolutionary lesson. She had learned from them the passion for freedom, the utter devotion to the cause, the determination to sacrifice everything for it. Everything. Money, position, family, material comforts, life, even honor. Whenever she felt unsteady on the perilous path of revolution, she looked at those eyes, and in a moment, her whole being was filled with a strange power. And then she felt she could face any difficulty, make any sacrifice. But those eyes were not merely the eyes of a revolutionary. They were also the eyes of a man. There was in them a wild animal attraction, a flame of passion, an invitation to taste the forbidden fruit. A glimpse of that fascinating world, the door which was barred by society to unmarried girls like Bina. But she knew this door could be broken open. She knew many girls in the party who had broken it down and stepped into the world of free love in open defiance to society. Could she too do it tonight? The very thought brought a blush to her cheeks. She ought not to think of such things. It was disgraceful that she, Bina, who had dedicated her life to the cause of revolution, should be thinking such evil thoughts. But were they really evil thoughts? And if they were evil, could she really keep them out of her mind? She knew she could not. The train came alongside the platform and stopped. Bina's mind was jerked back to reality. It was a 3-minute stop, and few passengers cared even to look out of the train windows. She ran from one end of the platform to the other, but could find no one, even faintly resembling the picture in the party office. The solitary passenger who got down from the train was a bearded old man in shabby clothes, perhaps a beggar. The two peasants got up from their corner in the veranda, swallowed up by the mass of humanity in the giant third-class compartment. The engine gave a whistle and the train, puffing wearily, was on its way. Had Vijay Singh then missed the train? Or had he been arrested already? And why was that old man standing under the light looking at her so closely? Are you Miss Beena? There was a note of refinement in the old man's voice. And she said, yes. She saw his eyes that were shining out of the bushy growth of unkempt hair, like two lighted windows of a house in a thick jungle. You are Comrade Vijay Singh? Yes, I got the message from the party secretary that I was to get down here and that you would come to meet me. Let's go. Beena brought Vijay Singh home. She had prepared some food before she had gone to the station and immediately served it in a gleaming brass thali. Without a word, he started eating. He did not even formally ask, won't you eat too? She sat down on a chair by his side. Vijay Singh was eating silently, hungrily, greedily, as if he had not eaten for days. Tears of compassion filled Beena's eyes when she realized that after 16 years of horrible jail diet, this was the first real meal he was having. She looked at him intently. Was this the same handsome, broad-shouldered Vijay Singh whose picture hung in the party office? No, he could not be the same person. How could he be? His head was almost bald with ugly sores caused by infectious water or the lack of washing facilities in the jail. His beard, half black and half white, grew in the most frightening manner. The hair above and below his lips had become discolored yellow. His teeth looked bioriatic. In spite of the deep compassion and admiration she felt for him, Beena shuddered at the thought that a few seconds before the train arrived, she had been imagining an amorous adventure with this very man. When Vijay Singh had finished eating, the thali empty and swept clean, Beena said, would you like a bath now? Here are the clothes the party has sent for you. I'm putting some hot water in the bathroom for you. As she said this, Vijay Singh cast a look on the rags he was wearing as though he had suddenly become conscious of his dirty appearance. Without a word, he went to the bathroom. He had spent many years out of the 16 in solitary confinement, and it seemed like he had lost the habit of talking to people. In Beena's presence, he was particularly silent, as if he were utterly dumb. He emerged from the bathroom looking somewhat cleaner and less tired. He sat down by the coal stove, which Beena had lighted because of the cold. Beena saw a gleam of happiness in his eyes, as if the ashes had been shaken off the embers. He borrowed Beena's scissors and cut his long, dirty nails. Then he asked for the party secretary's letter and settled down to read it. Beena knew that it contained an exhaustive review of the political situation for the last 16 years and a report of the party's work. As he read it, the old revolutionary fire returned to his eyes. Anger, sorrow, happiness. One could see the succeeding emotions in his eyes. After he had read the report, he was once again a leader of the Revolutionary Party. He had to give his suggestions and instructions to the party before he was sent back to the prison. He asked Bina for a pen and paper and sat down to write. She noticed that though his rough, bony hand shook as he wrote, after 16 years of turning the handmill, his fingers had lost their suppleness. When he finished the letter, he gave it to Bina and asked her to deliver it to the secretary. Bina looked at the watch. It was 9:15. To break the silence, she said, "Do you want to sleep now? Or would you like to sit up a little longer?" The reply she received surprised her. "I want to go to a cinema, a talking cinema." In a flash, her mind saw the grim reality of prison life. 16 years, from 1927 to 1943. So Vijay had never been to a talkie. He'd neither heard Saigal's melodies nor seen Joan Fontaine's beautiful acting. To him, names like Paul Muni and Bette Davis and Kannan Bala and Ashok Kumar would mean nothing. He was as ignorant of the magic of the talking pictures as a man living in the darkest interiors of Africa. For 16 years, he had been denied the beauties and pleasures of life, cinema and theater, song and dance, women's voices and children's laughter, the pageantry of the sunset, flowers in spring, the shade of trees and the velvet of green grass, love of a mother, love of children, a woman's love, nothing, only a dirty, dark cell. The harsh, brutal voices of wardens and prison officials, the company of hardened criminals and murderers, an island of death in the ocean of life beyond the frontier of humanity. And there he had spent 16 years, 192 months, nearly 6,000 days of anguish, 192 months and 6,000 nights of despair. After all that he had suffered, he had been granted only 12 hours of freedom, 12 hours of life, 12 hours of light and color and laughter. And then again, the huge doors of prison would swallow him. "I want to go to a cinema, a talking cinema." With childish naivety, he made this request. There's a child in every man. And even a revolutionary is human after all. Why should it be surprising that he had this strong desire to go to a movie, a cinema? Who knew he might never come out alive from the prison? He might go to his death with this one desire unfulfilled. There was only one cinema in the little town of Ramnagar where outdated Indian films were shown. Bina had never been there before, but now she took Vijay Singh with her. The show was about to start, and by the time they entered, the lights were switched off. Pictures began to move and speak on the screen. The film was Tufan Mail, an old, cheap, and crude film. But for Vijay, it was no less than a miracle. Years ago, before his arrest, he had seen moving pictures, but to hear them talk and even sing absolutely astounded him. He laughed like an uninhibited child at the antics of Charlie and Gauri. When the other spectators began to look back, Bina felt terribly embarrassed. But the next moment, she remembered that Vijay Singh was laughing like this perhaps for the first time in 16 years, and she too began to enjoy the picture, which she had seen before and thoroughly disliked. On the screen, Madhuri and Bill Moria were playing the game of love. Love that was carefree, sensuous, and full of gay abandon. Not the love that expresses itself in sighs and tears of frustration, but the love that is echoed in ringing laughter and shines out of suggestive glances. Madhuri, in a tight dress that clung to the contours of her body, was desire personified. Vijay Singh was engrossed in watching the film, but his hand, had he let it touch Beena's by mistake? It was hard, coarsened by manual labor, but still there was a certain warmth about it. Once it must have been a delicate and sensitive hand. The fingers were still long and tapering. Vijay Singh was watching the play of shadows on the screen, and his hand was placed on Beena's, but he was not making any attempt to increase the pressure of the contact. Beena thought, he must have touched my hand by mistake, and she gently withdrew hers. It was dark in the hall, yet Beena felt as if Vijay Singh resented her taking away the hand. After that, his interest in the film manifestly grew less. A little later, he said, let's go home. I have seen enough. When they came out in the light of the street lamps, Beena found him walking like a sulky child, with his eyes fixed on the road. When they reached home, Beena made a bed for Vijay Singh on her own cot. Then she spread her own bedding on the floor in the other room. Placing a glass of water on the table, she asked him, do you want anything else? And he shook his head to say no. But Beena saw that his eyes were fixed on her face. In their depths was the same gleam of passion. On their surface was the same childlike simplicity and that animal magnetism too that she had felt in the picture in the party office. Presently, the eyes grew dim and misty in them. Beena saw an appeal instead of desire. Quickly, she switched off the light and went to her own room. But the latch was on the other side of the door, on Vijay Singh's side. As she closed the door, she said, please put the latch on. She thought, is he already asleep? But from the other room came the sound of the creaking cot. He was turning over. After a while, it seemed he had got up from the bed. He was not asleep. He was walking about in the room. Beena knew the reason for his restlessness. After 16 years of a lonely, loveless life, the love scene of Tufan Mail had aroused his dormant passions. Tomorrow morning, he would go back to jail. There was just a few hours less. For so long, Beena had deprived herself of sensual pleasures. Was she to offer her virgin body now to satisfy the passions of an ugly, deceased old man? She had always dreamt of a healthy, handsome, young man who would love her and whom she could love, whom she would marry and from whom she would have children. She waited for him to come into her life and was still waiting. What a fall from that ideal to this reality, to this wreck of a human being. No, she would never do it. But her sensitive and sympathetic mind presented the other side of the same situation. True, Vijay Singh is prematurely old. There is a frightening growth of beard in his face. There are wrinkles on his forehead and sores on his bald head. But why? Think, Beena, think. 16 years ago, this very Vijay Singh was young and handsome and healthy. You have seen his picture, haven't you? Can you swear you never looked at it with the eyes of desire? Today, why is that same Vijay Singh in this miserable state? Why? A young man of 25 cannot grow so old and decrepit in 16 years. Why did Vijay Singh lose his youth, his health, his looks? For the revolution. For the revolution, Bina, for the revolution. The same revolution for which you are willing to sacrifice your life. But you only talk. He has shown what he can do. He sacrificed the best years of his youth, his romantic dreams, his friends and relations, everything. He suffered whippings, the kicks and abuses of the wardens. He has passed months in solitary confinement, like an animal in a cage. Why? For the revolution. And you are so heartless and selfish that you look with disgust at his beard, his wrinkles and his sores. Shame on you, woman. In the other room, Vijay Singh was still walking about. His footsteps came up to the door and then stopped. Bina's heart almost stopped beating. There was neither the sound of the latch being put on, nor was the door opened. After a few seconds, the footsteps retreated. Bina's heart began to beat again. No, he will never take the initiative. He is sensitive. He knows he is ugly and unattractive. He will not dare to approach you. If you don't go into that room, he will spend the whole night pacing up and down the room, and in the morning, he will go back to jail without a word. The man who had passed 16 years without love can also pass the rest of his life like that. But if you allow him to go back disappointed, you will never forgive yourself. His eyes, full of pitiful desire and yearning, will always haunt you. Vijay Singh's restless footsteps stopped. She heard the bed creak. He had laid himself down again. Maybe he will sleep, Bina tried to console herself. But immediately she heard him turning over on the bed. And what was that? Were her ears deceiving her, or was he really crying? Vijay Singh, of whom it was said that he laughed when they whipped him. Vijay Singh, who had smiled even on receiving the death sentence. The same Vijay Singh who had been on hunger strike for 50 days, who was afraid neither of death nor of deportation. The same Vijay Singh was crying today, sobbing like a child. Vijay Singh's eyes had failed to awaken deep desire in Bina's heart. He had touched her hand, it had meant nothing to her. But hearing him cry, something snapped within her. Crying children have to be petted and comforted and given something to keep them quiet. Wasn't this the great revolutionary Vijay Singh, also a child in this respect? In spite of his beard, his wrinkles and sores, from the depths of her being, conventional morality raised its head and tried to argue with her. Don't forget that honor is a woman's most cherished treasure. How can you squander it like that? And she was not convinced. It tried to frighten her. He is sick. He has sores on his body. You might catch some infection. But at that moment, Bina was thinking of those horrible 16 years which Vijay Singh had passed in jail. That long period in which every pleasure of his life had been denied to him. Cinema, theater, song, dance, the laughter of children and women's voices. And tomorrow, these 12 hours of life would have passed and he would be consigned to the same hell again. Vijay Singh would go back with his desire being unsatisfied. He had given his whole life to the cause of his country. But for him, a woman could not give up her body even for a few hours. A woman's love. softness and warmth, a throbbing heart next to one's own. These things had been lost to him for 16 years. And if he did not get them now, he might never get them before his death. No, she would not let that happen. She had dedicated her life to the revolution. Her life, her body, her honor. What was the value of her miserable body when compared to the sacrifices Vijay Singh had made? Better, fairer bodies than hers could be had for a few rupees. No, she would try to give him some comfort with her love, her tenderness, the warmth of her body. In a few hours, she would try to compensate for all he had missed so far. In her body, at least for a few moments, Vijay Singh would get something that he had been denied. And in the years to come, when the rigors of jail life would threaten to make him lose his faith in life, he would be saved by the memory of these few hours, the memory of a girl, of a youthful body, and he would smile. The clouds of frustration would disappear. He would regain his faith in life, his determination to keep alive his body and his mind for the sake of India, for the sake of revolution. And one day, when the country would be free, Vijay Singh would come out of prison, not battered and broken in spirit, but smiling with hope. Millions would hear the story of his life, and his record of sacrifice would make them lift their heads with pride. But then he would have forgotten even the name Bina. In the task of revolution, where would the time to remember an obscure girl? But then Bina would experience that feeling of triumph that an artist feels when he sees his masterpiece. Bina got up, opened the door, and went to the next room.